let's just start off getting right into it. Like, explain a little bit about like the type of work that you do and how you got into this type of work.
Yeah. So I have been working in the sexual violence field for the past 4 years. I support survivors of sexual violence, so anywhere from someone that has been sexually assaulted, harassed, sex trafficking, domestic violence, stalking, all of the things. So that's a little bit of my experience. I guess my whole ish is around violence prevention. So how do we prevent violence in the first place before even happening? Because I work a lot in the crisis intervention work where either it's when folks just experience sexual violence or maybe, it's a few years later, months, weeks, and they're wanting support. So my work in supporting survivors and their friends, family members, is kind of talking them through what are their needs and how can they be met and what happens if they don't get met. And so talking them through their different options and resources. How I came into the work, I almost felt like it, I always used to think that it was an accident, but actually in seeing this question, I reflected on it a lot more because after college, I graduated and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I was searching on Craigslist for jobs and I always was very justice oriented. I knew that I always wanted to help other people, for lack of better terms. I myself am a survivor of child sexual abuse. And so when I saw this job posting on Craigslist for working at Cal Poly's Center for Sexual Violence, which essentially is, providing resources for students on campus that experience sexual violence, I always thought that it would be way too triggering for me to work in the field. But at that point, to be completely honest, I was desperate. I was just like applying to jobs here and there. But the more that I think about it, there really was this like gut reaction when I saw that job of like, oh, that feels scary, but I want to do that. And so, I think of it as I went into this work wanting to help other people. But really, as I got more into it, it was like, I don't want to help other people. I don't want to heal other people. I want to heal myself first. And by healing myself, that inevitably heals other people. And so when I first came into kind of the sexual violence field, it was the most amazing feeling. I had never, I guess sexual violence in general is just pretty, it's a difficult topic to talk about.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt like for the first time in my life, that was like the most seen and heard that I had ever felt. It was this different type of community where I had, all of my social friends and I could still talk to them about, relationships and whatnot. And then I had this other community of people that there's this trauma that happened to me very early on that has impacted my whole life, that I can talk to my other social friends about, but it was just difficult. It's like
they can't relate to your experience in that same way.
Right. And so I think that was the most impactful thing, is like feeling like I was a part of a community that was able, without even saying anything, to somewhat understand my experience. I work in the sexual violence field. I also have my foot in kind of the restorative justice world. A lot of folks don't know what restorative justice is, so I kind of want to like back up and explain what it is. So before I explain restorative justice, I kind of have to explain what the opposite of restorative justice is, which is punitive justice. That is the system that we live in right now. So the criminal justice system, it operates off of you commit a crime, you break the law, and we're going to punish you. And that is going to deter crime in the future. That will be the consequence for you breaking the law. Whereas restorative justice and transformative justice kind of asks, rather than looking at crime as crime, it's looking at crime as harm, because there are so many things that you can do to harm someone else that doesn't, level up to what a crime in the books is. So it's who is harmed, what are their needs, and whose obligation is it to meet those? So very broad, it's a practice, it's a philosophy. It's essentially just a different way of looking at harm, and how do we prevent harm, and how do we respond to harm in a way that's going to be impactful and transformative. So I have, one foot in the sexual violence world, my other foot in the restorative justice world. In terms of restorative justice, how I got into that work, it felt very intuitive. I think that from a very early age, the person that sexually abused me when I was younger was my family friend. And I think, it was very natural. It's like when my whole life, it's like I've always wondered, I've always been curious to have a conversation of just like, why did you do that? And I guess that's kind of hard for other people to hear, because it is like when people think of, especially child sexual abuse.
I mean, your initial instinct is like, it's just so unfathomable, and it's so commendable. And I'm also so curious, like, how do you get to that place where you can have also empathy for the person that did the most harm to you?
And I definitely, I think that it's normal. And I do have this feeling of like, I hate you, and, what you did was awful. I truly, all I want in this life, I think in working in the sexual violence field and for myself, is for that to not happen to another human being. Like truly, that is like my whole life's purpose, is so that I can prevent things like that happening. And what's truly going to prevent someone from doing that again is not going to be punishment. It's not going to be shaming this person. It's going to be having a really hard, honest conversation about what happened in your life that led you to be like that. Not only what happened in your life, but like what societal conditions made it feel like it was okay to do that. And so, I guess restorative justice has always felt intuitive to me. That's what I wanted for myself, and that's what I want for other people. I want it as just an option. It's not that everyone has to, if they are harmed by another person, I'm not asking that other people buy into this whole other idea of thinking of harm and this practice. I just merely want it as an option.
Right. Just opening people up, because a lot of people haven't even heard of these options, like it's like you kind of have this, like, I guess the instinctual reaction is like, oh yeah, this person did harm, so this person should be punished. Mm-hmm. But then that doesn't solve the problem on a macro level. Mm. Yeah. What, you do this every day, and obviously, like, having gone through what you've been through, I'm sure it brings up a lot of personal feelings, and it's got to be like, it's hard work, obviously. What are some of the most common obstacles you see people face day to day, and like, how does that impact you, and how does that impact the work that you do?
There's so many obstacles that folks face, and it's truly it's case by case. Like we're surrounded by this culture that has a lot of really like harmful, toxic behaviors on us. And it's so hard to see when that is like the air that you breathe. And I think in doing this work and talking to survivors and seeing and hearing of multiple different times where people could have intervened, or where I'm like, I wish that person had that knowledge, or like for example, we live in a society that normalizes rape culture. And so if you look at that as violence is a spectrum. So violence it doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's not like people one day just like decide to be violent to someone else. Its foundation is in these like beliefs that we have about people. So society puts us in these little boxes. Like you have to be, one way or the other. And so putting people in these boxes and not letting them stray out of those boxes, it's harmful to not only the people in those boxes, but the people that kind of come out of those boxes.
How are you constantly holding space in an environment where you're doing so much emotional labor? How do you hold that space, and like what do you have to do? Because I'm sure that there's so many times where you're like, you feel that burnout, you feel that like emotional depletion. How do you come back to yourself?
Definitely. I feel like my answer to this is pretty simple,
Mhm.
but it's way easier said than done. Basic things. Take care of yourself. Drink water, make sure to get your exercise in. Not only like get sleep, but get also like find ways in your day where you're able to like relax and kind of like settle into this relaxed state. So basic things like taking care of yourself. I also think that it's so important that like this work doesn't become all consuming of you. It's not like your everything. So I feel like it's so important to find joy in your everyday. Like, make time to go on vacation, make time for like community and friends. And that is like also one of the most important things being in this work. It is so important to have people around you that are supportive, that understand what you do, that are able to kind of hold space for you, like when you are having difficult times. And I guess lately I've been thinking a lot about how important good leadership is too in this work. I feel like you come into it and it's extremely difficult. And I feel like the only way that I've learned how to really take care of myself is that it's been modeled by the leaders that I have had, leaders that are able to take off time for themselves, leaders that are able to implement structure, but also kind of have like flexibility within that structure, leaders that challenge you, but are also empathetic and loving and kind and all the things.
Yeah.
Can I jump in with a quick question?
Yeah.
You mentioned boxes that people are kind of forced into either by society or like whatever cultural like structures they exist within. Are there any, boxes, so to speak, that you see like your clients or like the communities that you're serving that are either the most rigid boxes or the most harmful? Like just to kind of specify a little bit more, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, like that is so case by case. It's like we know that violence disproportionately affects people that hold marginalized identities. And so there are folks coming to me that hold so many of those different identities. They're all intersecting, especially as it pertains to sexual violence. I mean, some of the root causes, it's like very rigid gender roles where if you break out of, conforming to what a stereotypical woman looks like in this society, folks see that and use that as justification to cause violence. And it's hard for me to like articulate this. In the field, we say, the root cause of all violence, whether that's sexual violence, whether that's, physical abuse, murder, all of it is power and control. Mm-hmm. It's and part of that power and control is oppression. And so when some folks have more power than others, very simply put, men have more power in this society than women. When that power dynamic exists, then it's like trying to get on that equal playing field.
For the people watching at home that don't know what community healing is, could you define community healing? And what are some of the, I guess, main steps in order to like achieve that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess before we talk about community healing, first I want to I feel like a lot of people confuse like self-care with healing. And I kind of want to be able to differentiate the two. So self-care is kind of what you do in your every, day-to-day. Healing, there are so many different definitions of healing. I think it's really based on what the person wants to define healing as. But the way I think of healing is that when harm or, when you experience trauma, and everyone in this life experiences some type of trauma. We live in a culture that kind of breeds it, whether that's a big trauma like experiencing child sexual abuse, or a little trauma, which, there's no like big and little, but if you're looking at it on a spectrum,
whether it's complex or not.
Yeah, and there's so many different types of trauma. Yeah. But like another trauma could be just like neglect by your parents, and that can be very subtle. So we all experience trauma in our lives. And so when someone experiences trauma or harm, whatever you want to call it, your agency, your power and control over like your ability to make that choice is taken away from you. And so healing is putting that power and control back into a person's hands. There's individual healing, there's healing in relationships, and then there's community healing. And so I want to give an example. So, individual healing. Maybe you're someone that struggles with substance abuse. That's a coping mechanism after you have experienced trauma. Individual healing would be, all of the small steps that you've taken yourself to come to the decision to stop using substances. Healing in relationship can look like having friends that hold you to it, having friends that are supportive of, whenever you're feeling like you want to use again, or whenever, you need support, they're there for you. Community healing can look like being in a, an AA meeting. So that's an example. I kind of want to break down community healing and kind of the different components that I think are necessary for community healing. And so I think the first one is that there's this shared vulnerability. It's, when you're gathering with this intention of being able to process a certain experience, process a certain, gathering with intention. There's some type of shared vulnerability. The second one is that when that vulnerability and that experience is shared, it is received and witnessed and held onto by others in a positive light, in a way that feels, like that feeling when you feel really heard and seen by someone. Like that's what you feel in spaces like that. And the third thing is that, you walk away from that experience and there's some type of agency restored in you, because you can be in that space and maybe not, people can receive it so well, but you can walk away from it and just be, maybe not have that feeling of like motivation or inspiration to contribute back to your long-term healing. And the way I kind of think of this is like, with the criminal justice system. So say, you experience sexual violence, you go to the criminal justice system, you're giving a victim impact statement. And so you're really speaking to your experience, but it's not received by the court, by,
Our current.
whoever is there.
Yeah.
That's not, I mean, I don't want to define, that can be healing to some people, but from what I've heard from speaking with survivors that do go to the criminal justice system, it's maybe more re-traumatizing to share that like really vulnerable experience with people and not have it be received is an awful feeling. And so I really, what would be the counter to that is restorative justice. And it can look like so many different things, but it's like being in a space where you are sharing your story of sexual violence and it is received and witnessed and like understood by people, and walking away from that just like knowing that that was like the right thing to do. And
you're given your agency back. Like you've gotten that back.
Yeah.
What how do you build open and honest language to be able to facilitate this type of healing, these type of conversations, and especially with the type of work that you do? Like, it's very quick, like you're not given that much time to build trust with people. So how do you build, because that's a huge part of it, right? Like it's like you have to build that trust in order for a person to be vulnerable. How do you achieve that? What language are you using to be able to facilitate that?
Yeah, I think it's so incredibly important. I say you're always leading with the relationship. Like the relationship is everything that you have with a person that comes to you with this really vulnerable experience. Like I said, like to be able to have it be received and witnessed by someone is so incredibly important. There are so many things that you can do. I'd say, just a few things off the top of my head is like moving at the speed of trust. So there's no like right or wrong way for someone to, approach you with their needs in an organization. So moving at the speed of trust, like some people might open up very slowly. And so you make more time to build their trust. Things cannot happen on a schedule where it's like you meet 3 times. Like there has to be some flexibility in it because every person and every experience is so different. Some people might want to get to it right away. It's truly different for everyone. Another thing that you can do, I think, is being very aware of not only, the power dynamics of whatever that might be, whether you're in a position working for an organization, whether you're a friend, whether you're a professor at a university, being very, very aware of those power dynamics and how it affects how you support that person and how that person opens up to you and what the repercussions could be. So being aware of power dynamics and also being culturally responsive. So just recognizing that harm looks different in every single culture. People have different experiences, people have different knowledges and beliefs that they're coming from. And so never ever making assumptions about something that someone shares with you. Being able to model the tone and the pace of the other person. So if someone's coming to you and is just like, I just got fucking sexually assaulted, and is like kind of laughing about it, laugh back with them. If someone is very slow and doesn't want to open up, like mirror that. Show them that you see them and it's like active listening, like with your body, allowing a lot of time for pauses and silences without letting them go on too long, I think having a lot of transparency around like, whether you're facilitating a group space, whether you're facilitating just a conversation, letting them know like this conversation will be going on for an hour. This is what we're going to be talking about. Because the thing with transparency is that, especially, people with trauma, when you're in this like fight or flight state, which your body way more like it's able to access that fight or flight state a lot more easy than maybe folks that haven't experienced a lot of trauma. And the thing is that when you're in fight or flight, you're always predicting what's going to happen next. Your body, you feel it in your body. And so the thing with, like transparency is that being able to give that structure and lay out, you know, the whole gist of how a meeting or conversation is going to go is really important.
You've talked a lot about reintroducing agency and choice to your clients and your work. How do you, that may not be super accessible to them based on the groups that you work with. How do you help people expand or introduce them to the choices that they have and the fact that they do have their own agency?
So I think that a lot of like being able to explain to folks that they do have agency. A lot of like the work that I did do with survivors is first listening to their whole experience, being able to ask the right questions, to be able to like understand like what they need, and being able to give them all of the information that they have for options for moving forward, like laying out all the information, all the possible outcomes, all of, you know, the possible shortcomings, and being able to make them make the choice. I think that's like the biggest thing, is that it's always the other person's choice. Because again, when you experience harm or trauma, that choice is taken away from you. And so it has to be their choice. But in order for them to make an informed decision, they have to have all the information to make that decision
Almost
themselves.
Like guiding them to and introducing them to, and then they're able to take their, you know, see it all laid out for them.
And then I think a lot of it too is just like walking along with them. I think that it's so incredibly important to have not only, you know, laying it all out there, putting it on the table, being like, I'm going to support you no matter what you choose to do, but also whatever you do, I'll be here every step of the way.
Right.
And I'm not here to lead you in another direction or lead you, you know, like
you're creating safety too. You know, you're someone that they can lean on, because it's, I mean, just opening up about it in the first place is such a scary and lonely feeling, and let alone having to actually then take the steps to healing. Like, that's not easy, you know? That was great. Thank you. You did so good.